Hi, I'm Amanda Morgan, and this is Not Just Cute, the podcast, where we discuss all kinds of topics related to intentional whole child development and supporting the critical work of parents and teachers of young children. Today, I'm talking again with Emily Plank, author of Discovering the Culture of Childhood. It's the read-along selection this year for Not Just Cute. That means instead of one overview, I get to have several in-depth chats with Emily as she tells us more about how we can learn to see childhood in a new way and how that can change everything about how we approach the work we do with young children. In this episode, we'll be discussing chapters 1 and 2 of her book. We'll be talking more about what friendship looks like in the culture of childhood and why the mantra, "We're all friends here," doesn't always fly. We'll also talk about how to better support young children who prefer to be onlookers or who struggle to successfully enter play. I love her story about George and the poisoned meat eaters, so we'll be sure to talk about that. You can find the show notes at notjustcute.com/podcast/episode 5. And be sure to join in on the read-along of Emily's book, Discovering the Culture of Childhood. We'll have subsequent discussions with her here on the podcast, including her answers to your questions. So be sure to submit those questions, and you can read about how to do that in the show notes again at notjustcute.com/podcast/episode 5. So now, let's jump in. Hi, Emily. It's so great to talk to you again.
Hi, Amanda. Great to talk to you, too.
So we are talking about Emily Plank's book, Discovering the Culture of Childhood. It's the read-along for Not Just Cute. And we already had an introduction episode. You'll want to make sure that you catch that and hear about some of the stories behind the book. It was really fascinating for me to hear from you, some of the background. It's not in the book. You have to get it directly from Emily.
Yes.
So for those that are joining in, can you just briefly tell us a little bit about the premise of this book? You talk about it in the introduction, but also in section 1. And I should say in this episode, we're focusing on chapter 1 and 2.
Yes.
Tell us just a little bit about that premise.
Yeah, so the premise of the book is the idea that adults and children comprise different cultures. And the idea came to me. You'll have to listen back to the introduction podcast to hear the full story, but the idea came to me through some travel opportunities that I had when I realized that I was interacting with other cultures as an outsider, and turning that same model around when I looked at my interactions with my own children and my interactions as an early childhood educator with children in my family child care program, and seeing that perhaps if we were to apply a cultural model to childhood, it might give us new understandings for the way we think about children. You know, we tend to think about childhood as purely a biological process. So, you know, children obviously are 1, and then they're 2, and then they're 3, and then they're 4, and there are certain things that go along with each one of those phases. But we sometimes don't recognize the cultural nature of that process. So, yes, so the premise of the book is that childhood is a culture separate from adulthood, and that if you take the model of cultures that anthropologists use when they study cultures and apply it to childhood, we can look for some of the pillars of culture in childhood in the same way that you might look for pillars of culture in other cultures around the world.
I just love that different perspective. And when we talk about that perspective, I think it's particularly applicable, and you talk about this a lot in chapter 1, that when we take that new perspective, it really helps us to see behaviors in a different way, common childhood behaviors that can be challenging to us as adults, that we begin to see that differently. So tell me a little bit, you referenced a story about some toddlers banging on the table and that it was really driving you crazy, and how this shift of perspective changed how you interpreted that behavior. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that story?
Yes. Okay. So when I first, I opened up a family child care, and when I first started, I just had 3 children that that were in my program, and at the time, I think they were maybe 6 months, 9 months, and 14 months, or something like that. I mean, they were 3 babies, and we were sitting at the dining room table, and I had them strapped in their booster seats. And they invented this little process where they had these little plastic plates and they would bang them on the tables. And it drove me crazy because I was trying to do the whole family meal thing, and we're going to put the food on the table and trying to do some developmentally appropriate practices around meal times. And I'd put them up at the table, and then I'd start to bring over the food, and then we'd serve it out and we'd eat together. And in this process, they would just pick up their plates and just bang their plates on the table. So I thought, and at first, one of the children would pick up her plate and start banging, and then the other children would smile, right? We all recognize that smile from the children. They'd smile, and then they'd pick up their plate and they'd start banging too. And I thought, well, this is ridiculous. And I would tell them, in my most experienced, I know what I'm doing voice, to say, now children, we don't bang on the table with our plates, do we? And I'd take the plates, or I'd say, plates are for food, plates are for sitting on the table. I would try to use all these methods that I thought were appropriate to teach them the proper function of a plate. Finally, the banging just got to be too much, so I took the plates away altogether. Well, can you imagine what the children did next? Without a plate, they just started using their hands. And one would bang with their hands, and the others would smile, and they would bang along too. And then they added a little cry along with it, like, ah! So pretty soon I've got a dining room full of children banging their hands, using their voices, ah, 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 and they're smiling. And, the only thing that I knew to interpret that is they're trying to get a reaction out of me. They're trying to see that I'm going to do something. We have this phrase, they're trying to make me mad, or they're trying to whatever. It's the same
pushing
kind of thing when they're pushing my buttons. When we just have one child of our own and they want to throw the spoon off the tray over and over and over and over, we say, they're just trying to make me mad. And this new model, so I was reading a book in preparation for my own book, about friendships among children. And it gave me a whole new way to understand that moment. I mean, I have to say, I don't remember ever coming to a really good, all I decided to do was just wait until the last minute till I was ready to eat and then put the kids up at the table, because I didn't really have a good explanation for what was going on at the time. But in researching my book, what I discovered is they're trying to be friends with each other. And this is quite a sophisticated interaction. So this gets more into chapter 2, which I know we're going to talk about shortly. But this understanding that if I could go back to the me, from several years ago, sitting at that dining room table, I could understand that they don't need an instruction on the proper use of a plate. That's not at all what they're thinking about. They don't care that food goes on the plate, that it should be quiet inside. They're trying to show friendship to one another. And if I knew that they were trying to show friendship to one another, I could honor that desire to show friendship. Maybe I would help them do it in a different way if the banging really was too much for me, or maybe I live in an apartment and I can't have that much noise above my downstairs neighbor, or there's lots of reasons that I might need to actually stop the behavior and intervene. But if I can recognize the seed of what that behavior represents, then I can still honor the behavior and still preserve their cultural need to be friends with one another.
And I love that distinction, that honoring and recognizing the context, the cultural context of the behavior doesn't mean that suddenly everything is okay, but that the way that we approach it is different and is likely going to be more successful because we're coming at it in a way that the child understands because we're looking at it in a similar way. And I
absolutely.
I also love, like you said in the book, that this approach of stepping back and being able to really look at behavior in its context. The other thing that it does for us, which I love and which I talk about to parents frequently, is that it helps us to remember that we don't need to take this behavior personally. It's not always about us, right? Right. That we talk about children being egocentric, but we are so egocentric as parents to think that everything is about us all the time. Right. And it's not. Or at least it's not motivated by a desire to inflict pain on us or to inflict suffering on us, to make us angry or to get under our skin or to get a rise out of us. Oftentimes it is motivated by a desire for connection with another human being. And the ways that children go about seeking that is really interesting.
but it's not motivated by a desire to make our lives difficult.
Right. That when we can see the real motivation, then it changes the way we approach it, and it helps us have that extra measure of patience. I feel like a lot of times people say I'm so patient, and I feel like saying I'm really not. As a person, I don't know that I'm very patient, but I'm able to look at these things in a different way so that it doesn't get under my skin, because I just have a different degree of understanding or a different perspective. And
yes,
that looks like patience.
Yes, it looks like patience, but it's not patience. I mean, this I'm trying to remember who I read, because this is not my own idea. And I'm going to have to look up whose idea this is, and I'll share it with you next time. But we tend to say with children that I have to be patient. I have to be patient. I have to have patience. But if you look at the word patience, it means that you're having to endure something really unpleasant, and you're having to endure something difficult and keep your own temper in check. And I think there's a slight but important difference in what we need to do as parents and educators, which is to say, I don't seek to have patience, I seek to have understanding, because patience can run out, and patience implies a hierarchy, right? That if only they could be like me, well, gee, I wouldn't need patience anymore because I wouldn't get irritated all the time. But if we have understanding, then that's where you can have, that's where authentic relationship happens. That's where communication happens, is in this context of understanding, which I think is different than patience.
Right. And I'll have to see, as you're talking about where it comes from, I remember reading an article similar to that in grad school. And I wonder if we're thinking of the same article. We'll see. Between the two of us, we'll see if we can find it and put
between
it in the
now
show
and next
notes.
time.
Right. We'll put it in the show notes so people, and then maybe somebody who's listening is like, I read that article too. I can tell you where it is.
Exactly. Yes.
So,
okay.
So you're talking about this all happening in the context of relationships. And I think that's so important. I feel like it's a thread that runs through all of human development, this concept of human relationships that drives so much of our development. And you talk in chapter 2 about how social structure and social drive in childhood are really different from the social structures we have as adults, and that we have to recognize, like you're saying, that friendships are different for children than this construct we have as adults. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what you discovered?
Well, I think there's a wonderful researcher named 𝐅𝐫𝐞𝐞, and he, from what I can tell, again, I'm not truly an expert in the study of childhood as a culture, but it has been around since about the 70s in the United States. And there's a researcher named 𝐅𝐫𝐞𝐞, and he did, I'm not exactly sure how he managed to do this, but he managed to embed himself as close to an insider as you can get while still being an adult and observe and interact with children. Because the notion is that, a lot of what children do is kind of quasi, right? It's quasi friendships. Like we often think about when children have to move when they're young, oh, it's okay, they'll make friends later. Or, when they transition from one classroom to the next, oh, it's okay because they'll make friends later. Because I don't think we necessarily value the friendships that they have, because I don't think we understand them. So a lot of what I know about social structures is informed by him. And he talks about that friendships among children and friendships among adults, like I said, they look different. For children, friends are people that they are interacting with in the moment. So, and it's a very visible thing. So I think back to when I was a child and I had those little friendship necklaces, the best friends necklaces. Right. And, I write about this in my book that my best friend, Erin, she and I exchanged these best friends necklaces. And this was a primary source of evidence that I have a best friend, because I have the first part, she has the second part. And now as adults, I don't have that anymore. I don't even know where, somewhere along the way the necklace has been lost, but the friendship is still there. And I don't need this kind of constant interaction to reaffirm that the friendship exists. But children, on the other hand, for children, friendship is a very shared public event. So one day, for example, and this is also a story I share in my book. One day, for example, there was a child who showed up to my program for childcare, and she was wearing new shoes. And her best friend in the program, she announced to her best friend in the program, I have new shoes and they make me run really fast. And she started zooming around the play space, just running as fast as she can. And I could see the best friend absorbing this information and taking in this information. And it was about 20 minutes later over breakfast where we had quite an interesting altercation that you'll have to read about for more details. But I could tell that the best friend was deeply wounded by the fact that she and her friend no longer shared the ability to run fast. And that would be a sign of their social connection had been broken. Their friendship had been broken by the fact that one had something that the other one didn't have.
So interesting. And I think when we see that they, as children, that their friendships are still very meaningful, but they're different than what we tend to think of. And like you said, that there are times that we don't fully appreciate what is important to them in their friendship.
Yes, I mean, it's for children, one of the things that's really significant is, I mean, children spend a huge amount of time discussing who's in and who's out. You know, this is a theme that runs a lot through children's play. You can play with me. And, you know, I should say that right now my own children are struggling a lot with this, who's in, who's out. So this is a theme that's raging in my family right now. But the children will come up with a play scheme, and the primary hurdle for young children as they're trying to figure out how to be friends with one another is trying to figure out how to successfully enter and sustain play with other people, because evidence of friendship is shared experience. And so if I am an outsider to play, if I try to get in and I'm told by the other children, no, you can't play with me, that's the same thing as saying, you're not my friend anymore. And so teachers, I mean, educators and parents, we see this happen all the time. We see one child try to enter the play group of other children, get rejected, and as an effort to try to help, we say, no, children, everybody has to play here. We're all friends here. Everybody can play. But what we don't realize is we've undermined what's just happened in that whole context. So when children are playing with one another, if one child tries to enter the play, you have to imagine it's like, picture you're at a cafe and you're having a conversation with another friend, and you guys are talking about something really meaningful and deeply important. Perhaps something very tragic has happened, and you're discussing that with this friend, and you're trying to help this friend through a situation that's really difficult. And from the corner of another area of the restaurant, somebody else approaches, and it's somebody who you maybe know casually from work or casually from a softball league that you play on. And that friend says, hey guys, what are you talking about? Can I play with you? Can I sit and have coffee with you? You would say, of course not. We're having a shared experience right now. We are having a moment. You can wait and we'll have coffee later. And that, this interaction at that cafe, we can take that same idea and transfer it onto children. So when children are playing, you have one group of children that's playing, another child tries to enter the play. If we tell that outsider, we tell the insiders, you have to welcome the outsider, we have just taken the shared experience and torn it apart. Perhaps the child that's coming in doesn't know the script. They don't know what's happening. Perhaps the child coming in from the outside is going to knock over the castle. Perhaps the child that's coming in from the outside is going to try to overrule what's already been happening. But what we can do is, because we know that this rejection, it's more than just a simple, no, we're going to keep going with our play now. We know that what the children are actually saying is, you're not my, it communicates, you're not my friend anymore. We can help children see that, just like with coffee, I can say to this outsider, I can say, I'm having a really great conversation with my friend Amanda right now. I would love to catch up with you, but we can't do it right now. How about next Thursday? So we can teach children to do something similar. We can teach the insiders to say to the incoming person, we're playing now. You and I are still friends, but we're going to have to play later. Or you can't play now, but you can play later. Or we're still, but reaffirming this message that we're still friends.
And sometimes we undermine, I mean, that's really complicated social dialogue to have that kind of a conversation. They definitely need some support in verbally expressing those fine points. But I think sometimes as adults, we take the easy way out and we say, you know, we're all friends here, or you can't say you can't play. And and while that might smooth things out on the surface and it feels easier, this hard work of coaching them through the dialogue, the social dialogue, is going to create more skills and be more applicable to them in real life, because that's how they negotiate. Social negotiations, I just think they're so important in early childhood. They're just critically important. And sometimes because it's hard work for us to support it, we just kind of try to get rid of them.
Right. Well, and I think it's hard work, but also we can connect to the feeling of being rejected. I mean, I think many of us arrive at adulthood with stories of rejection from our own childhood. True. We remember perhaps in middle school when somebody didn't dance with us, or we remember even further back to when we have experiences when we were rejected, and we want to save our kids from those. So we think, boy, if I can just create an atmosphere where everybody can get along and everybody can play with one another, then nobody has to feel this rejection. But one of the really important things is that we're telling children rejection, this might sound bleak, but you're strong enough to handle rejection. And not only that, but this rejection does not have to mean the end of a friendship. So we're helping children build that resiliency, even in the context of feeling disappointment. We're allowing for that disappointment, even though for some of us it pulls back to some perhaps difficult memories of our own, or just desire to save kids from having to feel hurt.
But instead, we need to focus on helping them build that coping mechanism.
Absolutely.
And give them skills to interact with each other. And so I think I read it in your book, actually, this importance of shifting our perspective, again, just a little bit, rather than trying to force these friendships everywhere, that we recognize you don't all have to be friends, but you do need to be kind to each other, and shifting the focus just a little bit that way, that we're not going to plaster everyone with this label of friend, because that's not being authentic, really.
Right.
That rather we just focus on being kind to each other. That is something we can expect for everyone.
Absolutely. Because I'm not friends with everybody that I meet. You know, there are people that I meet who I really connect with, and there's people who I meet that I don't necessarily connect with very well. Perhaps I will continue to engage with those more difficult relationships because of other reasons. But I don't have to be friends with everybody. But again, I do have to be kind to everybody that I meet.
Right. And I think we can teach kids that difference. That's really important. And when you talk about this, entering play, I feel like that's something that is frequently challenging particularly in a school setting or a group setting, that a lot of the behaviors that we see that are challenging is in that dynamic of a child trying to enter play successfully. And you shared a story that I thought was really interesting to me, about George and the poison.
Yes.
I just love your perspective on that story.
Okay, so this one I think is a perfect illustration for everything we've been talking about. I had a little boy in my program at the time, and this will make it easy for telling the story. In my program, it was all girls and 2 boys. One of the boys was an infant baby who was not involved in the story. So in the story, we have a group of girls and we have George. And George was very fond of a game that he called Poison Meat Eaters. And I don't know, I mean, he was really interested in animals. He was about 2 at the time. He was very interested in animals, and he had just named this game Poison Meat Eaters. And what he would do is you would see him out of the corner of your eye, and he would bare his teeth, and he would put up his hands like claws, and he would just slink across the room step by step by step, and you'd see him with his teeth flared and his nose scrunched up, and you knew George was a poison meat eater at that moment. And that if you didn't intercept George before he reached another person, he was going to claw that other person. So I spent a good 2 weeks with George as a poison meat eater, trying to figure out what was going on, trying to intervene every time I possibly could, because I'd see, I'd be cleaning up after lunch, and I'd see George as a poison meat eater, and I'd have to run and intercept him, and I'd be putting children down for a nap, and here comes George the poison meat eater, and I was running to intercept him, and this whole time, and I tried all kinds of different things that I knew. I tried, people are not for scratching, or, if you need to scratch, here's something that you can scratch, or, you can throw pillows, or, I thought maybe it's physical energy that he needs to get out, so let's teach him other ways to get that physical energy out without hurting people. I tried to come alongside him when I did not intercept him in time and his friends were crying, and I tried to say, George, see, you hurt what you did caused, that hurt them. She's crying. What can we do? Let's get an ice pack. Let's get a Band-Aid. How can we change this? And so I just went around and around and around, and finally I decided to dedicate, this is kind of amazing as it sounds. It's kind of under the radar of lots of things that are happening. And I think for those of us who are educators and parents, we know there's sometimes behaviors that are running just below the surface, and you don't realize how repetitive they are till you decide to stop and sit down and watch them. And so I need to spend a morning, and I just need to watch George and find out what's happening. So I sit down and I'm just watching him. And sure enough, the girls are playing. And here comes George from across the room. And so I interrupt him and get him directed into something else, and then I watch again. And pretty soon the girls are playing, and George comes across the room. And I realize what he's trying to do is he's trying to play with the girls. I mean, it hit me like a bolt of lightning. I don't know why it took it so long to reveal itself to me. But finally, once I realized it, it was like, of course, he doesn't know how to play, and he's trying to get into play. And so my solution was, for a while I tried to teach him, George, when you want to play, you can ask, can I play? Well, the girls didn't have such a great track record with George and with him being this poison meat eater, so they weren't exactly eager to jump on board with the play. But at one of our meal times, we were sitting down talking about it together, and I said, you know what, everybody, we are all learning different things. We are all learning how to be a community together, and George is learning. One of the things George is learning is he's learning how to play, and so I'm going to help teach him how to play, and I want you all to work. We're going to all work together to help George learn to use his words to ask to play rather than his hands to ask to play. And, so I kind of coached the girls in advance. And one time when I saw George's claws up, then I went alongside him and I put my own claws up and I bared my own teeth and I scrunched up my own nose and I started walking next to him. And I said, hey, George, I put my best poison meat eater voice. I said, are we poison meat eaters? And he said, yes. And I said, are we trying to play with those girls? And he said, yes. And I said, okay, let's watch for a little bit and see what they're doing first. So we stood back a little bit and we listened to the play, and it was something about kings and queens. And I said, it sounds like they're playing kings and queens. I think if we go claw them, they're not going to want to play with us. Maybe we should ask them if they need a guard for the castle to make sure that no poison meat eaters get in. And he said, okay. So we marched over to the girls, and again, I stay in character, and I said, we're trying to be poison meat eaters. We're trying to be guards. Do you need a guard for your castle? And again, because we had kind of discussed it as a community, the girls had some sense of what was going on, but that's not necessarily, a prerequisite in every situation when you're trying to help kids. But the girls said, of course, we need somebody to help protect the moat. Here's the moat. And so George and I then turned around and focused our claws and attention outwards towards the imaginary moat. And we could guard the castle then. And pretty soon the girls had made George a bed inside the castle so that they could bring him inside when nighttime came. And they were feeding him like a little baby, and they had fully incorporated him into their play. But they needed to know that their play was going to be safe. They were going to be physically protected from somebody hurting them. And he needed some skills to get into the play. And so for a while, for several days, I tried to save myself some really unstructured, unplanned time in the morning when I knew I wouldn't be interrupted by the needs of the babies in the program or getting lunch ready. And I tried to sit close to George, and I tried to enter the play with George a few days in a row to help him figure out how to do it. And then he had the skills to do it on his own, and then there wasn't a problem anymore. So, not that all the problems were solved forever and ever, but at least in this moment, he had some strategies and some skills to get into the play.
I love that story. And I think it's a great example of, we talked in the last episode about this kind of a different perspective of adults and teachers as lifeguard mode, that you're kind of detached and just shouting orders from your chair way up in the sky. And that rather than that, you come down to their level and you really get involved with the play. And in that way, you can more authentically really coach and help in a meaningful way. And I just think that illustrates that practice so perfectly. I love it.
Absolutely.
I think it also gets to this topic of onlooker play. And for anyone who's, familiar with Mildred Parton's stages of social play, that we still value onlooker play as a level of social play, because it requires what you just coached George through. It requires us to take some time observing and watching. And some children spend a lot more time in that stage of play. They spend a lot more time really observing what's going on. And this came up in a training recently, and I actually referenced your book. It was really fun. There was someone there that was like, I have that book, I just bought it.
Oh, good.
But we were talking about, we have to value onlooker play. We need to make sure that we are recognizing that these children aren't just bad at playing, but that they're doing their part to absorb what's going on, that some of these children are really good noticers, and they're really quite adept socially. They just take their time warming up and paying attention. But when we were talking about this, well, first, let me use this quote from your book. You wrote, without appreciating that this period of observing and circling the play of other children is, in fact, children's attempts to maximize their chances for success, adults believe observant children need help to enter play. What's more, these helpful suggestions from adults are often a guaranteed failure for children's entry attempts. And I think, again, your story about George is a great example of how some of our helpful suggestions are completely antithetical to what's really going on.
Right.
And your story with George shows how we really get to their level. But as I was talking about this with some teachers, as I mentioned, one of the questions that I thought was a really valuable question, and I was hoping maybe you could help with it. They asked me, but what about that onlooker who never joins in? So we have our onlookers like George who spend some time watching and they try to enter, but they're not very successful. And they said, well, what about the ones that are just always watching and they never seem to get into the play? How do we support and help them in a way that respects where they're at?
I think it's an important question. And, just to, again, I like to think of it in terms of adult relationships, because I think it helps us appreciate what children are doing. Again, you can imagine yourself like at a cocktail party or something. And when you arrive and you show up to the party is already in place. It's already happening. You don't just march up to a group of people and just start talking. You walk close to a conversation. You listen for a little while to see what's happening, or you find somebody who doesn't look like they're already engaged in conversation. You start to engage them. So, some of the things that children do in onlooker play are actually the same things that we do as adults. We just don't usually recognize it in children. I often hear parents, when you show up to the park, right after getting to the park, I'll hear parents tell their children, oh, there's somebody at the park. Go ask them if they want to play. And for children, a direct request to play is often seen as an interruption of what they're already doing. And in order to protect this social, this social connection that they have, which is a fragile connection often, then they will tell that incomer, no, you can't play. So this is a good question. So for onlookers who have a difficult time entering play, I think there are several things that are important for teachers to do. I think first, for us, what constitutes a long period of time might not actually be as long as we think it is. So I think it's important to spend some time documenting to figure out how long it actually is. Has it just been a few days? Has it been a few weeks? Is it before or after an extended time away? Are Mondays more difficult because they're just getting back from the weekend? Are there patterns to the challenge, or is this somebody who genuinely does not engage? I think there's a few things that we do in our environments that make it more difficult for children to have sustained social play. For one thing, our days are so fragmented that just after children get into a play rhythm, we want to come in and interrupt it with circle time or morning meetings or mealtime or nap time or the 1,000 different things, some of them really important things and some of them teacher created, generated interruptions. But sometimes our days are so broken up that children who need more time don't actually have it. So for children who are, who feel like persistent onlookers, first let's look back at our own programs and see, are they environments that actually support strong social connections between children? Do children have, several long blocks during the day of an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours where we are not interrupting them with our own agenda? If not, perhaps we need to look at our own schedules and make some adjustments for children who really need a long period of time. And, for other children, again, perhaps they are just really good at observing. And I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. For children, if you looked through all the different criteria, you kind of observe the child for a while, you look at your own program, then you might be more direct with the child and ask the child, are you interested in playing with them? Would you like to play with them and ask them directly? Or simply go alongside them and start playing with that child yourself and see if you can kind of assess their ability to play and their ability to sustain play. If they seem interested in playing with you, then it's fair to assume that would be an interest that they'd have with other children. And maybe with some coaching, that onlooker child could have more success with other children. But I think we need to be careful with this notion that children should move past onlooker play by a certain age. I don't know that there's a problem in and of itself. If there are other behaviors that seem concerning besides just that onlooker play, it might be worth getting an opinion from somebody who's a specialist in child development. But I think for a child who's purely a very good onlooker, I don't know why there would be a reason why you would need to interrupt that and need to try to push them out of that onlooker phase.
Like with George, it became an issue because it was creating problems for other children.
Right.
And it became apparent that what he wanted, I think that's something to notice as well. Children who are onlookers because that's what they're enjoying is different than a child who's an onlooker because what they really want is to play with the children, but they don't know how. Those are two different situations.
I mean, I know when I go to parties with lots of people I don't know, I do kind of like to stand by the corner and
warm up a little bit. That's me.
One person that I came with. I don't want to have to jump right into conversation with a whole bunch of people that I don't want to talk to.
Yeah, we can all relate as adults to our different comfort levels of social interaction, and some are, take longer to warm up, or some that jump right in and love to be the center of attention, and some who, like, I'd rather have a very deep conversation with one or two people than be in the middle of a raucous crowd.
Right.
And that children are the same way. They have different preferences, and so we don't have the same social objective for all of them necessarily in the way, they're not all going to interact socially in the same way because we're all human beings and we all have different.
Right. And I think by honoring that need that the child has to be an onlooker, we teach them that need is a valuable need, that they are a valuable human being who has a need to watch for a long period of time. Whereas when we try to get in and force, and again, it's in the context of a much bigger picture of this child than just this one isolated issue of being an onlooker. And so it's hard to speak out of the context of the child. But with that said, when we honor children for who they are in the moment, that child learns something profoundly important about who he or she is that says something about them as a valuable human being in the world. And that is something that this child can carry forward, whether she or he decides to stay an onlooker for a long period of time or not.
Right. And I think as you talk about that, someone who's an onlooker and honoring the value of that, I think of a post, I'll have to share it in the show notes as well, by Rachel Macy Stafford, and she talks about her own daughter who's a noticer, and that it was kind of pointed out by a teacher in a negative way, that she, kind of in the sense that she was distracted and she's too busy noticing all these other things. And she wrote this beautiful post about how much she values the way that her daughter notices everything, and that she's a watcher. She can be an onlooker, but because of that, she catches details that are missed by other people. And I think we can see that in some of these children who are not the life of the party,
Right.
that are onlookers, they're watchers, that they're noticers, and that we can point out that strength to them as well and value it ourselves.
And again, I think, we're motivated by our own fears and concerns for children. So we think if this is a child who is in need of intervention and I don't intervene, then this child is permanently on one course or another. And so as adults and educators, we are motivated from very good places of wanting to make sure that our children are set up for a successful life. But again, I think we've bought into this notion that childhood is this continuum where they need help to move from one place to the next, instead of looking at the wholeness and the completeness that is evident in every stage.
I love that. And as we were talking about onlookers, you pointed out several themes that support not just onlookers, but all children, and being able to engage in deep play and having the time that they need. In Chapter 2, you did give several really valuable tips for adults, helping them to create a really authentically socially supportive environment. Are there any others from that list that you want to add as well as we wrap up this section talking about friendship and positive behaviors and being socially connected as children?
I think it cannot be stated enough that we should not, unless it is absolutely necessary, interrupt children. And I say absolutely necessary, knowing that is a different there are different definitions of that than for some people than for others. But, children live kind of as pieces in a game, perhaps, that they just get moved along by somebody else, by some schedule that they have very little control over. So, children who are in a childcare program arrive at a certain time of the morning, whether or not they were ready to get out of bed. They're given breakfast, whether or not they're ready to eat. They're given snack time at whatever time it is for snack time. They have lunch together with the program. Oftentimes there's nap, and then they get picked up and it's time to go home. And a lot of those things, they can't change. I mean, they truly are out of the control of the child. So within the structure of that larger structure, as educators, we can protect. I know when I ran my family childcare program, from breakfast until morning snack, that's one big long stretch of time when I don't interrupt kids. I know that there are some programs that that have gotten rid of the clock altogether, that choose not to have set times for morning snack, for afternoon snack. That works in some situations, it doesn't work in others. And with all of these suggestions, I don't think that there's one master way that everybody should do it. But I think without a doubt, one big warning, and this can be for parents and for educators as well, is that as little interruption as we can possibly give to children, it's just better. I know with my own kids, for our family time, if I can consolidate my errands so that we're out of the house for a block of time and then we're home for a block of time, rather than out and back and out and back and out and back. And, now that my children are school age, I try to be careful about how the period of time after school goes, that, they come home, and the period of time from arriving home until dinner is, I don't put a whole lot of external demands on that time, with exceptions for homework and other things that they need to do, but they have a lot of control over that time. So, I think the biggest thing is protecting the amount of transitions that we enforce on children.
That's a great point. And helping to recognize that children need space. They need these chunks of time. When we talk about social development, that so much of the day, like you mentioned, is so orchestrated and organized by adults, that doesn't leave room for them to have the autonomy that's required for these social interactions and for social development. So I think that's such a great tip, whether it's in our family lives or in a program, that we have not just an accumulation of time that is open for these social experiences and play, but that we have chunks of time so that it can become deeper rather than just being on the surface several periods of time over the day, but that it's one long time.
Exactly. I mean, it takes time. And one author that I quote in my book was referencing a conversation that her own children were having between each other, two siblings, and the one sibling was describing what life was like in kindergarten. And he says something to the effect of, don't worry about starting anything here. They never give you any time to finish it. And it was this moment of true authenticity from from the mouth of a child who was saying, why am I going to spend any time getting involved in anything? I'm just going to have to clean it up right away. Just have to clean it up right away. And I've had my own children tell me the same thing when I get too preoccupied with the schedule. And, to be perfectly fair, there are lots of times when children do not have control over their schedule. And, that's not necessarily something, it's unfortunate, but it is a reality. Parents go to work at a certain time, and on and on. But from within the context of things that we as parents and educators do have control over, we don't have to worry about getting out all of the, children don't have to have sensory time every day and outside time every day and math time every day and circle time every day. I mean, we can make things available and just let children naturally flow from one thing to the next.
And some of that, I think, comes with understanding. One of the things I talk about with teachers is understanding we see the childhood experience or our classroom experience as all these tiny little pieces and parts, and we kind of segment them all, but the child's experience is more holistic. And so sometimes we can include those 4 or 5 different things, but it can look like one more cohesive experience rather than 4 or 5 different separate activities that we can sort of integrate a lot more effectively.
Yes.
My goodness, Emily, I always feel like I could just talk to you forever. Her book is Discovering the Culture of Childhood, and it's the read-along book for Not Just Cute. And we have just been talking about chapter 1 and 2 right now, chapters 1 and 2. And so if you have questions for Emily, you can email those to me at amanda@notjustcute.com. We'll make sure that we wrap up this whole series with a question and answer session with Emily. So I know as I talk to Emily every time, it spurs new ideas for me. So I'm sure for those that are listening, if you have some ideas or some questions, send those along to me in email. We'll make sure that we discuss those. Our next session is going to be looking at chapters 3 and 4. So, Emily, I'm excited to get to talk to you some more about those ideas as well.
Sounds great. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks again for listening to Not Just Cute, the podcast. You can find show notes at notjustcute.com/podcast/episode 5. I'm Amanda Morgan. You can read more on my blog and sign up for the Not Just Cute newsletter at notjustcute.com. And follow me on Facebook. That's facebook.com/notjustcute. Thanks for listening today. And thank you for standing up for children and childhood.